welcome to the second episode of Howl About It, the show where we where we celebrate the indie gaming scene and explore the heart and soul behind it. So, if you were with me last week when I interviewed JSAWS, that was the first time I had ever done a show like this, so I was quite nervous, but thankfully JSAWS gave me quite a bit of feedback. So, yeah, really looking forward to today's show. We're having on our guest, Zan.
Hey, hey.
If Zan, you would like to introduce yourself and tell us what Hedon is.
Yeah, I'm Zandev, previously solo developer of Hedon. And Hedon is essentially a GZ Doom game. So it runs on a fan updated source port of the Doom engine. And yeah, it's a classic FPS with accent on story, world building, atmospheric levels, and of course, buff orc babes.
Okay, like always, what I tell the chat. So I have 15 questions prepared. When we get to question 14, I'm gonna ask chat to prepare your own questions because we're gonna open it up to you guys. But starting you off with something easy here. Our first question is, what is one thing you learned about GZ Doom or game design in general that you wish you had learned sooner?
Well, to be fair, GZ Doom is a pretty straightforward engine, and this is one of the reasons why I like it. There's usually one major way of handling things, especially back in the day when ZScript wasn't that prevalent. Obviously, there are little technicalities that you eventually stumble across, and to be fair, as far as Hedon goes, because of the level design that's a bit more intricate than the original Doom games would allow. There's all sorts of issues. There's the infamous like BSP, like endless pit. It's like a fracture in the world, like a broken triangle in the textures, and that's like very annoying to fix because GZ Doom wants you to align your lines to a grid, and as soon as you want to create some organic shapes, and Hedon being set in the underworld, and there's a lot of caves, there's a lot of nature, underground nature. It's got plenty of organic shapes. So GZ Doom doesn't really like that, but there are ways to work around the limitations. It's actually kind of funny because the very final map in Hedon Bloodright, I forgot to mention, Hedon is actually two games. Hedon, which was released in 2019, and Hedon Bloodright, which was released in 2021. And they're both bundled in the same executable, let's say. You can find them on Steam and GOG. It's the same game. It contains both of the games. And the very final level of Hedon Bloodright, which is the second game, the one with the boss fight, obviously the final boss fight, is so broken. It's like it's being held together by glue at this point. And every time I move a vertex in that map mesh, something breaks. Like I need to check. It's like half of the boss arena suddenly becomes like walled off, like I can no longer go into it for some reason, or it's there are certain lessons that you learn the hard way, but yeah, it's technical stuff, so it's the stuff you'd expect to run into.
Yeah, I remember when I was speed running that I had to quick save a lot during that boss fight because there was just so many unexpected crashes I would run into.
Yes, I know
Yeah.
I know what you're talking about.
Yeah, there's a lot of moving parts with that boss fight, but it's I'm impressed at how you managed to pull all that off, how it transitions back and forth. Yeah, spectacular boss fight. So, with Hedon, you describe it as being a crystal punk, which that's to me, hearing you describe it sounds like adjacent to arcane punk. Subgenre, for anyone who doesn't know, it's a subgenre of fantasy where like magic and technology develop in parallel with one another. And I'm wondering if what inspirations have you drawn from for this genre?
Right. So first of all, what I mean by crystal punk is that there's this underworld which has crystals, obviously magical crystals, and these crystals have certain properties. They provide heat, light, things that would allow uh, life to thrive in the underground. And on top of that, they can also be used for certain weapons. And most of Hedon's arsenal is focusing on the implementation of these crystals with like fantasy weapons and so on. Um, so basically, what I understand through Crystal Punk is like a mix between traditional fantasy and some sort of high tech element, right?
Mm-hmm.
And the first time I was introduced to this, I believe, was with Might and Magic 6, where it's like a traditional fantasy game, and then suddenly you get blasters like lasers in the in the late game, and I was like, the younger Zan was mind blown by that mix of bizarre elements. It's like, wow, it's like these diametrically opposite, sci-fi and fantasy.
Mm-hmm.
And another game that really impressed me with how seamlessly it blends these features is Wizardry 8.
Mm-hmm.
Not sure if you've played it, but yeah, it's like a fantasy game where you start off by being on a spaceship and crashing on a planet, and you end up fighting like androids with maces and spears, and it's like
Mm-hmm.
an awesome blend of elements. So yeah.
So there's a comic book series that I think only went for about 10 issues, I want to say. Um, Despite that, is very well. It was very well received, very well loved. The artist, uh, everybody calls him Joe Mad. Excellent style. It's a series called Battle Chasers, which is colloquially known as an arcane punk. Have you heard of that series?
I have heard of it. I know the visual style. It looks pretty awesome, but I'm not really sure what arcane punk is supposed to be. Is it like magic with weapons or
Yeah,
with like
it's it's
firearms?
it's a lot like how you described crystal punk being. It's really it's yeah, that subgenre where there's magic and technology blended together.
Oh, yeah, there you go then. Hedon is an arcane punk. You can describe it as arcane punk from now on.
Yeah, and there's even a game because the comic was discontinued, but it was um, later fleshed out more in a game called I think. Hold on, I'm gonna pull up my Steam library. I'm drawing a blank on the name. I think it's Night War. Yeah, Battle Chasers Night War. It's
Uh-huh.
turn-based RPG, and I highly recommend anyone interested in that genre or just turn-based RPGs in general.
Yeah, the
Also,
art style is amazing.
yeah, incredible art style. But yeah, there's one of the party members you get is a war golem. You know, he's powered by some sort of magical force. I don't know if it's crystals or what. But and there's a girl in the game. She's like a tank actually. She has a gauntlet that is powered by some kind of ancient crystal. But yeah, it's got all of that there.
Mm.
Uh, Great game. So uh, transitioning on here, what was your greatest challenge to overcome when developing Head On?
I think getting started, and I think that's usually the biggest challenge of actually making a game, um, because I didn't have any background in making games, in programming, in any of the paradigm related to video games. Because there's one thing to play video games, there's one thing to try to break down game design. And at that time, I was playing World of Warcraft, and I always had an idea in mind on how I would change the game, how I would balance the game. I feel like every gamer kind of has like an opinion on how they would alter a particular game to make it quote unquote better.
Mm-hmm.
But of course, when you actually make a game, you have to understand how the assets relate to the code, how everything comes together. And it's kind of a challenge for someone who's completely clueless to get started. Like I really had to force myself to hang in there and to keep trying until I
Mhm.
uh, slowly but surely started getting a grasp of things. Um, and I think one of the things that really helped me keep going was just being able to draw my own textures and just see them in
Mhm.
motion in the game, because that was indeed something that I knew how to do, to make digital art. And yeah, it was like amazing to see this change, from a still picture to, oh, okay, now it's a tiling texture.
Mhm.
So yeah, that's getting started. It's always a challenge.
So seeing all that work come together, was that one thing that kept you motivated, or was there more? What kept your drive going to develop Head On?
I think the act itself of making a game. Um, Last year, I played a game called Viet Cong,
Mm-hmm.
and I actually ended up watching a documentary on how they made it. And it reminded me a bit about a documentary about Thief, another game that I really like.
Mm-hmm.
And one thing that struck me was that, these are early 2000s, late 90s games, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it impressed me how excited the developers were. These were not very large dev teams, they were like up to a dozen of people, even less than that sometimes.
Mm-hmm.
And they always talk about how they would sleep at the office. And it's not because they were forced to sleep at the office, it's because they were so excited. They were like, imagine you're breaking new grounds. You're
Mm-hmm.
making something that maybe nobody has made yet. It's like 3D, it's moving. It's almost like you're creating a world, because, well, that's what you're doing. And up until computers, that's something that only gods could do. So it's that rush that you get from like creating this thing. And games are difficult to make.
Oh
Not
yeah.
everyone make it. And once you get going and you start realizing that, it feels like you found kind of like a unique thing to do, like a special thing. And yeah, it's very motivating. Like the act itself, just being able to make the game, to me, was enough motivation.
And I can absolutely relate there. With my thing is character design. I love making characters. Like you had mentioned World of Warcraft. I like will hone in on a very specific look, especially now with retail, how customizable your character can be. Like I come up with backstories and everything. I did the same with Skyrim, so it's seeing all that come together. Um, is one thing that really motivates me. So moving on. So I think I saw them earlier in chat. Zombie, the develop the modder Dumax with his below the Gaudy Goblin being, as far as we know, the first ever fan made map. What was going through your mind when the first time you saw it?
It's an amazing map. And obviously, because GZ Doom is so friendly with modding, um, it was only a matter of time until someone would make a head-on fan map.
Mm-hmm.
And Below the Gaudy Goblin by Max is freaking amazing. Like, I love it. I think the coolest thing about it is that it takes about an hour and a half to complete.
Mm-hmm.
And during that time, it completely encapsulates the essence of Hedon. The slow start,
Mm-hmm.
where you don't even have any weapons, you're not fighting, you're just exploring. Uh, the crescendo of the atmosphere, um, the interaction with characters, the whole like mind games, like what's going on, that sort of like storytelling. I'm not gonna spoil it, obviously. I really suggest that people play it.
Right.
And it really feels like Doom Max perfectly distilled head on in this one fan map. And yeah, it's awesome.
Yeah, it's got to be very flattering when somebody like it's like he just knows your world that you've created, and it's you could really see that come to life. Like it's if it weren't made by a mapper or a modder, I would have thought it was part of the game because it blended in
Yep,
so seamlessly.
it's that good.
Okay, so thinking back to I don't remember when this was. You had made a post on Twitter or X now a while. This was a while ago. In response to another developer, some indie game. I can't remember which, but they were talking about FPS weapons, and one thing you had mentioned was that they need strong melee weapons. So, what are some of your own personal examples from games that did this well?
I think one good example, well, first of all, the reason why I think boomer shooters should have strong melee weapons is because they're not having a strong melee weapon feels like such a missed opportunity.
Mm-hmm.
Because obviously, since it's a shooter, you're supposed to shoot projectiles at your enemies.
Mm-hmm.
But in many boomer shooters, Hedon included, that followed Doom or Quake style of combat design where projectiles move relatively slowly to your speed, right? So you can dodge it. It's not like a build game where there's hit scanners, right?
Mm-hmm.
Um, this type of design allows for the player to dodge projectiles and to get up close to the enemies.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a shame not to explore that possibility and give the player a possibility to just take things up close. You know, take the risk. Hey, I might get hit once or twice, but at least I have a powerful melee weapon that's very fun to use.
Mm-hmm.
And I think Quake 1 is a good example because you have the axe and you never use it. It's like a almost completely useless weapon. Like you only use it if you're just completely out of ammo or
Or
against
have
very.
quad damage.
Yeah, but then think about Arcane Dimensions, which is the fan map. Sorry, the fan map set for
Mm-hmm.
Quake, and they have I believe it's called the Shadow Axe. It's like they updated the axe so that you can get a better one that's actually very powerful. And I think there is even a power up that not a quad damage, but one that gives you like Berserk or something like in Doom.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, they took a weapon that was just useless to something that perfectly viable. And you know, it's a shame that you don't get to use the axe in the original Quake.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you even have an entire game mode devoted to that with a um, Berserk. It took me a moment to think
Yeah,
of it, which
yeah, the
I
Berserk difficulty.
I still have yet to complete Blood Right on that mode. I completed the base game, but not Blood Right. So I had so on the same subject, I had a very dumb like shower thought the other day. Um, just a random game mode that you could add called oh what was it? Like instead of melee weapons, you have like a barbarian mode. Everything's like musical instruments. Like you have
Uh,
a lute and a drum and all that. Just I don't know, just a dumb thought that came to me.
oh, that's a good thought.
Okay,
Yeah, it for me it was kind of like that. You know, I was like, hey, so Hedon has 6 difficulties for those who don't know.
mm-hmm,
It has 5 conventional, let's say, difficulties, somewhat similar to Doom, except there's also the puzzle aspect of the game because Hedon requires you to solve puzzles to explore. In a way, it's
mm-hmm,
kind of like Hexen in this regard, and some of the higher difficulties remove some clues, like highlighted parts of texts and so on and so forth. But the final difficulty is called Berserk, and it completely replaces the guns with melee weapons.
mm-hmm,
Um, you have your axe that you can throw on alternate fire. You have like a hatchet with a shield to allow you to fall back to, you know, in case you're getting peppered with ranged attacks, you can like defend yourself and fall back.
mm-hmm.
And so on and so forth. You know, some of them are very fun, like the fire hammer, which essentially, when you strike with it, you cause an explosion,
Right.
and that explosion blasts you as well. Obviously, you have a shield, like the fire gives you a shield that reduces that damage to like 1 or 2 hit points. It's not a big deal. but it's very fun to do things like rocket jumps with it. um, yeah, it's like a very fun difficulty, and I wish more players gave it a shot.
Yeah, I'll have to get back to playing Blood Right on that mode because I did thoroughly enjoy it. It was tough though. Like it played on what is it, the third or fourth difficulty, equivalent to that, but you're limited to melee. So,
No, it's the sixth. Oh, yeah, I know what you mean. It's a bit of a hybrid. Like, I think it has the item spawns from the toughest difficulty, like the nightmare equivalent,
mm,
but there's less enemies. There's some custom stuff involved.
yeah. Overall, I felt it was pretty balanced. So, next question: what would you say, aside from your own character Zan, what is the design choice that you're most proud of when it comes to Hedon's overall theme, whether it be a specific cast of the Iron Division, a weapon or enemy type, NPC, or location?
Yeah, so I mentioned the buff orc babes. uh, yeah, the story is essentially about this sort of like nomad tribe that settled into the underworld, and they discovered a tribe of orcs that discovered the crystal technology, right? And they essentially became kind of like the guardians of it. And they're some of the last people capable of fighting the demons. There's obviously the threat of an imminent demonic invasion coming from the very bowels of the underworld.
Mm,
And yeah, you play as Zan, who's the blue half orc, half demon girl on the cover. And she's part of the Iron Division, which is this faction of Amazonian orcs and goblins. And this was the cornerstone of this fantasy world. And yeah, thinking about it, the way I came up with this was essentially I really liked two things. Orcs, um, in part due to Warcraft 3 back in the
mm,
day. I thought, Warcraft had a really, really interesting rendition of orcs. They were no longer the mud people from Lord of the Rings that were just purely evil.
yeah.
And I thought it was something interesting. And the other thing is female-only factions, Sisters of Battle. At that time, I was also playing a game that's very dear to me called Spellforce, and the elves, they're also like a female-only faction. And I was like, hey, okay, let's merge these two things together. Female-only orcs, boom, Iron Division, orc babes, Hedon. So yeah, that's where we're at today.
Which so within the Iron Division, like what was your like favorite cast?
Yeah, so the Iron Division is kind of like it's split within 6 castes. You have fixers, which are basically the goblin tinkers, the ones that handle the technology of the of the underworld. Then you have the reavers, which are what I refer to as jokingly as hobgoblins. They're like bigger goblins who are essentially kind of like a black ops. They're like rangers. They have the spike gun, which is essentially like a crystal power Gauss rifle. Sorry,
Mm,
and they're kind of like the if it was an RPG, they'd be some sort of ranger or archer or assassin. They're range fighters. They focus on stealth.
mm,
And then you have the orcs. Actually, no, you have the witches, which are a mixture of orcs and goblins, and they're like essentially the mad scientists of the faction. They obviously dabble in alchemy. They use a weapon called the potion launcher, which is
yeah.
I like all the weapons in Hedon, but this one is because it has such a cool flavor. It's basically a grenade launcher that shoots potions. Um,
One
yeah,
of my
why not?
favorites actually.
Yeah, and the witches use it. Then you have the Earth Mothers, who are the traditional spellcasters. They're kind of like elemental mages and druids.
Mm-hmm.
They tend to the grove. They're like they're maintaining the life of the flora in the Iron Division's territories. Um, And then what do you have? You have the bear warriors, who are like the main army. They use axes and crush bows. The crush bows are basically giant ass crossbows that shoot explosive crystal tipped bolts.
Mm-hmm.
So they're like the main force of the army. And then you have the greatest and the wisest of all the Iron Division orc warriors, which are the lancers. You know, they're like the elders, the peak warriors and peak scholars. And they are the keepers of the secrets of this crystal technology, to the point where they even have like a symbiotic relation with the crystals, and you
Mm-hmm.
can see that they have crystals growing out of their shoulders.
Right.
And these are like shielding, they provide them with protection from damage. So out of these, I have this, like, just like with the weapons, I really love them all, because if I didn't love them all, I wouldn't have made them.
Yeah.
But like, I think the lancers are pretty badass, and they're like very in tune with that crystal punk vibe that I mentioned.
Right.
So yeah, I'd say that maybe the lancers, slight bias, just slight.
If your game were a RPG, I would probably choose the fixers myself. So
Yeah, they're fun.
I always play Rangers.
Oh, the
Um,
rangers are the reavers with
oh,
the spy
sorry,
guns.
yeah, they both start.
Fixers, I forgot to mention it. So they have this pest control method, which is basically a gun that shoots like a shotgun on the primary and like a flamethrower on the secondary, and a lot of people really love it. It's the frag fire gun.
Yeah, and I think out of everything, that one is my favorite. I love shotguns in general, and that one's a very unique spin on the shotgun. So, well, with all this talk about the Iron Division and weapons and enemy types, were there some, if any, weapons or power ups that you decided to scrap, and why?
I didn't scrap much content. In fact, I think the only weapon I scrapped was related to the potion launcher that I mentioned. The potion launcher was supposed to have 4 ammo types,
Mm-hmm.
but because of the way it works, which the potion launcher is basically, right now in Hedon, it has 2 ammo types, but the way it works as far as the game code is that it's a duplicate weapon. Like you're just grabbing 2 different weapons, but they look the same. So when you're pressing the potion launcher key, you're just switching to a different weapon, but it's still the potion launcher. And that's the kind of like the problem. I didn't want the player to have to switch through 4 ammo types in order to get what they want, because it felt like it was making things more clunky. So I just decided to scrap 2 of the ammo types and just keep it with acid potions and toxic cloud potions. One of the scrapped types is actually still in the game. If you use the give weapons cheat, you can get the frost potions. But they function in a very similar way to the acid potions.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah.
Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, that's just like with the shotgun and super shotgun and Doom. Like, imagine if we had two more shotguns, like one with 3 barrels and one with 4. It would get annoying swapping between all of those. So
Yeah.
it totally makes sense. So next question is so some games, especially in the build engine, they like to make a lot of pop culture references. You even had Duke Nukem voiced by John St. John, hidden in Bloodright. So
Yep.
what are some of your favorite Easter eggs, and will we be seeing any more of them in future projects,
Easter eggs in Hedon, right?
or just Easter eggs in general with build
Because
engine? Or
obviously, like, there's at this point there's multiple Hedon Easter eggs in other games. So obviously, uh, I think my favorite is obviously in Ashes, because Ashes 2063
mm,
is such an amazing game.
yeah, yeah,
It's one of my favorites, and it's got quite a few Hedon Easter eggs at this point. Um, yeah, there's a few games, so obviously. Um, as far as my own games are concerned, I have this thing where I don't really like adding too many Easter eggs. Like I kind of want to tone down things because if you have too many, it stops being such an interesting discovery.
Hmm.
Um, I don't have anything in mind in particular, but whatever I will add in the future games, it will probably be. I'll try to restrain myself. I
Hmm.
feel like there are certain boomer shooters out there that are really overdoing it.
Yeah,
Yeah,
it got kind of to the point where it was overwhelming, and like say Ion Fury, there's like an entire YouTube video dedicated just to references that game has.
yeah, a bit overwhelming. Yeah.
It's a great game, but it's like you it kind of, I don't know if it want to say that it slows down the pacing, but you're just like always stopping to look around and say, "Oh, I know what that is."
It
Like that.
does break the immersion a bit. I
Yeah,
guess it depends how you do it.
right. So we talked a bit about the orcs and elves and all that. For Hedon, you wanted to move past like the typical conventions of the fantasy genre. What are some other fantasy tropes that you would like to see a new spin on? Like, can you share any of your own ideas of that?
You know what's funny? A while ago, I played Kingdom Come Deliverance, which is essentially a very realistic approach on, well, the medieval ages.
Mm-hmm.
And it felt so almost alien to me because if you think about most games that approach that period, they go with some tropes that were just not realistic. And
Mm-hmm.
then you play a game that's actually trying to be as realistic and historically documented as possible, and it's like something else, you know, it's like something I've never seen before in a very funny way. Because you have these fantasy games that go out of their way with all sorts of over the top designs and yeah, they keep trying to twist certain elements, and then you have this game that's just, hey, we just try to make it as realistic as possible. And it feels like such a wild thing to play and such an interesting thing to play. And yeah, it kind of like marked me. And yeah, it's like, how about this? How about trying to make a fantasy game that's very credible, you know, that's got very grounded elements, and you know, almost go in opposition with something that's very bombastic and crazy.
Mm-hmm.
I'm willing to explore this avenue. Maybe people will like it and they'll feel the same I did playing Kingdom Come.
Yeah,
So
that,
yeah,
that game that game's
go
really
ahead.
good, but it's hard for me to get into. I it really knows how to make you feel like a level one character. Like your guy is just he's so inadequate at everything.
Yeah.
But yeah, there's some real sense of progression. Uh, let's see. So yeah, one thing you had discussed in another interview was your interest in the RPG genre. You had mentioned Might and Magic as well as WoW. Have you ever tried tabletop RPGs?
I played D&D a while ago, but I didn't really stick to it. It was only like a couple of sessions. Other than that, no, not much. Obviously, I played like the CRPGs, you know, Icewind Dale,
Mm-hmm.
uh, Baldur's Gate, Neverwinter Nights. But besides that, no, like I haven't touched tabletops too much.
What about as a viewer? There's a couple of shows. One of the big ones is Critical Role, and there's also um, one based in the EU called High Rollers. Have you ever watched either of those shows?
No, no, I'm not familiar.
Well, with Critical Role, they're basically a lot of American voice actors. They get together and they have a wild time. That, um, but yeah, it really gives you a sense of what tabletop can be like at its peak. But if that's something you would ever be interested in, I'd highly recommend that show.
Yeah, I definitely think tabletop is great for game design.
Mm-hmm.
Obviously, we now have Tim Kane. I keep mentioning him everywhere because he's got a lot of experience with RPGs, and now he's dedicating a YouTube channel to sharing his vast experience. And uh, he underlines just how important CRPGs are, especially when designing RPG worlds, because there's something about tabletops that encourage people to be creative,
Mm-hmm.
uh, because tabletops are not limited by mm, the limited systems that you would have in a game. They're a bit more,
Theater to the mind.
yeah, and I feel like understanding what makes a tabletop RPG can be very good for designing a legitimately fun game. And it's in a way it's somewhat connected to one of my favorite genres, which is the immersive simulator, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I can definitely say that I'm more of of a student of that school of game design, let's say. And if you play Hedon, you can probably notice that I really tried wherever I could make it look like an ImSim. I tried to. It's not an ImSim, obviously, but yeah.
I can definitely see the influences of it though. Like with the crafting stuff, like having to collect ore and make and then smelt them down to ingots and then go to a workbench, all that stuff. It felt that
Yeah.
all felt very MSIM.
Yep.
Uh,
A lot of arcs fatalis.
so we're gonna be um, moving on to more general questions that I'm gonna ask anybody on the show here. So how is progress going on your current project, and how are you adapting to Godot?
Yeah, so I said I was an ex solo dev in the sense that the project I'm working right now is a two-man effort.
Mm-hmm.
I'm working with Papi Laplage, who is he's working on the programming side of things because once I moved away from GZ Doom, I actually tried Unity, and I got hit real hard by having to program my own systems because, as I said in the beginning, GZ Doom is a very straightforward engine to use.
Mm-hmm.
For example, if you want to have a character move around, well, the movement code is already set up. All you have to do is input values, whatever. You can start moving right away. All you have to do is essentially just replace, extend, modify. You know, it's a very friendly engine for people who don't want to go too deep into programming.
Mm-hmm.
Unity is a blank canvas. You know, you open it and there's nothing. Like, yeah, go ahead, make your game, bro. um, and I actually did that. I tried, taking it step by step, making movement, making all sorts of systems. But I quickly realized that if you're not experienced in making a game, and the game I'm trying to make right now is an immersive sim, right? So it's literally one of the most difficult kind of games to make. It's got a bit of everything as far as the programming goes. So yeah, this is where I teamed up with Poppy, and we also decided to ditch Unity because it was that time when they decided to mess with the licensing,
Oh yeah, yeah.
and it made me realize that it's fundamentally wrong to make a game in an engine that you do not own. Um,
Mm-hmm.
as far as I'm concerned, Unity can always pull away their support. And when I think about the games I make, I really want them to hopefully even outlive me. Like I'm thinking about long time, right? I want them to be as playable as possible and to maintain them in the future. So
Right.
obviously, having to rely on Unity for that is not a good idea. And instead, we decided to go for Godot, which is open source, and for better or for worse, it at least allows us to, well, own everything and
Mm-hmm.
maintain everything. Um, it's a generalist type of engine, so it's in this regard it's similar to Unity. It's basically you open it and you have a blank canvas. But at least now with that we're a two-man team, we can work a lot more effectively. It's a very difficult game to make, and it's gonna take a while, so people should be patient. But the good news is that we're really making progress, and I feel like we're in a point where it's like there's not a whole lot of reason to worry about not being able to make the game.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, it's as much. This is all I can reveal for now. Maybe we will be able to announce something publicly by the end of the year.
Or
If
have some
not, maybe
screenshots,
next
maybe.
year. Yeah, I don't know. I don't want to hype people up too
Yeah,
early.
that's understandable. What sort of experience does sorry, the name is escaping me.
Papi.
The Poppy.
Yeah, Papi la plage, the old man at the beach or something like that. He's French.
What sort of prior experience does he have with game development?
Well, actually, I'm not sure. Is he in the chat? I don't think he is. Um, he's actually his background is as an artist, and he's actually a very good artist. You know, he occasionally draws. We hang out in Discord, and he
Mm-hmm.
even made some Hedon fan arts. You can find them on Steam. Um, he's more of a traditional programmer, but he's very interested in games, and that's basically what I like. I really liked how both of us are kind of like breaking down certain games,
Mm-hmm.
like how does the programming work, how did they do certain things. Thief, for example, since we're making an imsim, we're kind of looking at Thief, even if people still debate whether Thief is a full-on imsim or not. I think it is, and it's awesome to discover just how complex and how like you know, it's kind of like a joke that these guys perfected the stealth genre on their first try. It really is like that. Like Thief is such a deep game, um and this is something that is awesome about me and Pop, is that we're both very much into this game. He knows what he has to do. I don't have to babysit him.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, it's awesome being able to work with someone.
This sounds like you got a complementary working dynamic with the two of you. Um, so I'm curious, what are some other indie projects that you're looking forward to? I know one for sure. It's Sulaco.
Yeah, Salak was amazing. Honestly, I have been kind of out of the loop lately because, quite frankly, I don't really have that much time, and some of the games in my backlog are basically old games. Like I rarely play new titles, so sorry to disappoint you, but I don't think I have much else. Selaco, maybe whatever Vostok and the crew will be making with the Ashes 26 series.
Oh yeah.
Can't think of many others, honestly. Yeah, no, sorry. Like no, I'm very much out of the loop with what indie games are hot right now.
Well, I mean, Sulaco for sure is definitely a big one. I'm very anxious for chapter two. That that just really shows like even Hedon can show what GZ Doom is capable of. Like, for the longest time, I just thought of it as a port that removed some of the limitations, but it's no, it's so much more.
It's surprisingly powerful, and again because it takes care of a lot of programming related um, features. It just gives you more time to add cool stuff to it. It's really that simple.
Mhm. Okay, so next question. Oh, and this is the point where I'm going to ask chat to have your questions prepared, because we're coming up to the end of my questions that I have prepared. Um, so what would you say is your greatest gaming accomplishment?
I understand where you're coming from because you're a speedrunner, so you have this challenge of completing games very quickly, right?
Mm-hmm.
And there's like a competition going on. I can't say I have a similar type of achievement, like, you know, oh, I scored first place in something. Um, so I'm gonna cop out and say I finished Hexen without needing a walkthrough. I think that's my greatest achievement.
That well, that's pretty impressive because I that's one game I had to give up on. Yeah, I was
Well, there you go.
hunting for the 72 switches or so, wherever the meme
I
goes.
did it. I did it all by myself, and then I made Hedon.
uh, what would you say is your most embarrassing gaming moment that you're willing to share?
Oh, jeez. I don't have anything that's particularly interesting. Um, Obviously, the embarrassing moments happen in multiplayer games, right? Like you mess up,
Mm-hmm.
like you're playing World of Warcraft in a raid and you just pull like a boss or something, and then everyone hates you. But I can't really remember like one particular event. Um, Yeah, I also play shooters, and one embarrassing thing is always like doing friendly fire, I guess.
Yeah.
Okay, here's a funny anecdote. Well, sort of. I also play airsoft, right, which is kind of like a real life
Mm-hmm.
FPS. And while shooting friendlies is embarrassing in video games, at least you're behind a screen, right? Uh,
Mm-hmm.
Hell, you can even leave if you're too embarrassed. Although, come on, everyone does it. It happens. But in airsoft, it's kind of like you're facing the guy you shot, and he's looking at you, and he's really pissed off. And sorry, dude, like I didn't PID you as I should have. Uh, so I guess that's pretty embarrassing. But hey, it happens.
I used to own a few of those myself. Yeah, a friend of mine once drove up to my house. He had an airsoft like M14, and it had full auto, and he's just firing it, and I'm sitting there on my front porch getting pelted by it, and I had to run back inside. Yeah, it's fun
Yeah,
times.
gotta love it.
Okay, so we have a question from chat. Grib wanted to know what was you mentioned the frost potion. What was the fourth potion that was going to be in the launcher?
The weapons in Hedon take quite a bit of inspiration from Unreal 2.
Mm-hmm.
And you have in Unreal 2, you have the Hydra grenade launcher that has, I think,
Right.
6 ammo types. You just switch between them.
Mm-hmm.
But you also have that weird insect weapon that shoots like a larva.
Mm-hmm.
So that was the fourth potion type that was planned. You basically shoot a larva that sticks to a surface, and whenever an enemy comes close to it, it bursts. So it's kind of like a proximity explosive. But that role was taken by the Hellclaw. So the Hellclaw is this weapon that you get from a demon, and it shoots kind of like the plasma rifle in
Mm-hmm.
Doom. And the alternate fire shoots this ball that basically acts like a bouncing Betty. So whenever someone comes close, it bursts out of the ground and it explodes. So there was no point in duplicating that functionality.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, speaking of the Hellclaw, one thought just occurred to me. I was curious. That weapon we're talking in the base game. That weapon showed up in the first level, and you never see it again. What was your decision behind that?
I didn't want to include demons in the first head-on game. The first head-on game is you fight the cultists, which are like the
Mm-hmm.
grunts employed by the demons. Um, yeah, I just didn't want to have that weapon. You have the spike gun, you have the crystal lance. They sort of like fulfill the role of a ranged weapon that shoots projectiles
Mm-hmm.
in a pretty straightforward manner. Uh, you may not know this, but the first part, the one where so you start the game, you wake up in hell. That
Mm-hmm.
part was actually retroactively added to the game because I
Mm-hmm.
felt like Head-On needed a bit of a more conventional type of tutorial for players, right? So I
Mm-hmm.
decided to add that segment retroactively, and I was like, hey, if it's like a vision from hell, I might as well give players this weapon.
Okay. So Zombie asks, when asked about your work schedule during Blood Rights development, they don't understand how you're able to make it all in 2 years or so. How long have you been doing game dev full time?
Right. So Blood Right, I started working on it very soon after I released the first Head-On game.
Mm-hmm.
Um, And yeah, that's pretty much when I became a full-time dev, because by the time I released the first Hedon, I already had saved enough money. And basically so that was during the pandemic, right? 2019,
Mm-hmm.
2021. And I
Mm-hmm.
basically just locked myself indoors and just worked nonstop on the game.
Yeah,
Because
look,
Head on Blood, right, is roughly twice as big as the first one in terms of content, right? And how many hours it usually takes people about 20 hours to finish it.
yeah,
I just crunched the living hell out of it from the start to the end. Yeah,
yeah,
there's your answer.
yeah.
But yeah, so yeah, I guess I've been full time doing game dev since 2020, 2019, something like that.
I think that describes a lot of people during that time.
Yeah, yeah.
A lot of people just locking themselves in and finding something to do with all that time. Animaniac asks, head on brutalizing hardcore win.
Never, never, because so what she's asking about is when am I going to mix the last two difficulties, excepting the melee one that I mentioned?
Mm-hmm.
So hardcore is essentially the fourth difficulty, and the way it's supposed to change the game is that uh, it makes you take a lot more damage from enemies, and it reduces your resources, right? So you find less ammo, less health. So it's kind of like a enhanced survival mode. Brutalizing, on the other hand, it's my spin on Doom's nightmare difficulty.
Mm-hmm.
But instead of respawning monsters, you just have just way more monsters, but you also have way more resources. So it's kind of like a chaotic mode where you can afford to use higher, the stronger weapons more often. You know, there's more fighting. It's more challenging in that regard.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but yeah, because of how these are set up as so the difficulties, the spawns, so you control what spawns through the map, right? You just check some boxes like, hey, this item is supposed to spawn on this and that difficulty.
Mm-hmm.
And because of how I already set up the game, it's very difficult to go back and create fusions between these difficulties. So yeah, it is what it is. No hybrid difficulties anytime soon, sorry.
When I first read that and I saw hardcore, I thought it made me think of how like World of Warcraft hardcores, like attempting to play the game on the hardest difficulty in one attempt. Like that's what I thought they were getting at first.
No, it's like a mix of pre-existing difficulties.
Mm-hmm. Right. So unless there's any last minute questions, I think we're ready to wrap it up. But yeah, I want to thank you, Zan, for coming on to talk with us.
My
Um,
pleasure.
yeah, and appreciate everyone being here and tuning in for this. Yeah, we're going to do a giveaway, and I want to thank you again, Zan, for sharing those keys with me so we can do this. So if you do not own the game, here's your chance now to win it. So we're gonna let Zan go now and go work on that project of yours or whatever else you have going on this evening.
That's exactly what I'm going to do right now. I still have to finish some work. But
All
yeah,
right,
thanks a lot for having me. It's been a pleasure.
all right. You take care now.